Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are so close I can almost taste them. However, having just competed in the Pokemon World Championships, Sword and Shield's aftertaste continues to linger. Generation 8 is unique in that Sword and Shield remained the main platform for competitive Pokemon and received support from Game Freak throughout the entire generation. Typically, the remake and enhanced versions would take the stage upon release, but that wasn't the case for Gen 8. Because of this, we've all been playing Sword and Shield for 3 whole years as opposed to 1 or 2. I have milked this game dry. Trust me when I say I've been living off crumbs these last few months. I mean, I even beat Emerald Kaizo for content. Anyway, let's use today's video as a palate cleanser for whatever delicacies await us in Generation 9, and take a look back at Pokemon Sword and Shield. Pokemon Sword and Shield were officially revealed on Pokemon Day 2019. The trailer gave us glimpses of our protagonists, our starters, and the Galar region, which would be based on the United Kingdom. The gameplay didn't look too different from Sun and Moon, but at least the graphics were up-resed. Rumors circulated for months before we got another peek. In June, we were given a second trailer that showed us a few Galar Pokemon, the Wild Area, Dynamax, and our new legendaries. After getting Overworld Pokemon and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, people were excited to see them make their way into Sword and Shield. But the return of the classic linear route design and fixed camera were not greeted with open arms. My arms were crossed tightly. The open world area looked like a step forward for the series, but we were all confused why the whole game couldn't be like this. The Switch can run Skyrim, Xenoblade, The Witcher. You're telling me it can't run an open world Pokemon game? Before we knew it, artist renditions of the games we had hoped for began circulating online. This one, in particular, showed up on my timeline for like 2 years. But the negativity train was revving its engines. Its first victim? A tree. Who would have thought a compressed JPEG of a tree would be the loudest source of discussion around this trailer? This tree texture, while admittedly not super easy on the eyes, was blown way out of proportion. Some people even sold merch around it. To some, this was proof that these games were rushed and unpolished, that the Pokemon Company had stopped caring. The games were just another product to be churned out for easy money. Is this true? Who knows? Pokemon is the highest grossing franchise of all time. Shouldn't they be putting more effort into these graphics? I do think there's more to the story than this, but I'm an optimist. I'll let you decide. Not long after, we got Sword and Shield's biggest controversy, Dexit. Honestly, the conversation around Dexit is way more annoying than Dexit itself, so I won't get into it. All you gotta know is Sword and Shield was only going to have 400 of the 900-ish Pokemon in the franchise, and people were big mad. Calls to boycott or restore the Pokedex were making the rounds on all social media platforms for months. Game Freak tried to remedy the situation by addressing the concerns and making it clear that they weren't adding more Pokemon, but that only made things worse. It was a messy time. But there's no justification for the harassment the developers had to endure. So next time you're upset that we're not getting enough trailers or interviews on the new games, you know why. So November came around and Sword and Shield were officially released. Despite claims that the games would perform poorly due to all the controversies, they ended up surpassing everyone's expectations. In their first week, Sword and Shield sold 6 million units, beating Super Smash Bros. Ultimate by 1 million units and making them the fastest selling Switch games at the time. Better yet, the games were received fairly well by critics and fans alike. Of course, the Dexit crowd was still seething with anger, but most people agreed the games were good with an assortment of hiccups. The games have been clouded with negativity since launch, so let's go over the positives first. The new Pokemon were good. For the most part, they had great designs with thematic ties to the region. The regional forms especially. Never have I seen such a combination of design and theme before Galar's Pokedex. Many Galar Pokemon even began dominating the metagame, with some going on to become essentials for VGC. I remember having the time of my life sweeping entire teams with Dracovish. It wasn't even Dynamaxed. Speaking of Dynamax, I actually love this mechanic. If you want to hear me go more in depth on why I love it, check out the video where I rank every gimmick we have so far. For now, I'll just say that I think it reinvigorated my love for competitive Pokemon by making every match more like a chess game and less like an unbalanced anxiety machine. A lot of people claimed it was lame for just making your Pokemon get bigger and overpowered for 3 turns, but I see it as way more than that. Maybe it's because it was clearly designed for competitive Pokemon, which are all double battles. I do feel bad for the people who play the fan modes of Pokemon, like single battles, especially as this generation, it really felt like Game Freak was doing everything in its power to get rid of them. Rest in peace, 60-minute timer. Online laddering was better than ever. Pick the singles or doubles ladder, pick your team, pick your music. Now here's a minute to decide how you're going to crush your opponent. The rental system was easy and accessible. Just enter a code and bam, here's a free competitive ready team. I can't stress enough what a big deal this was for competitive Pokemon. One of the biggest things holding competitive Pokemon back is that it takes time to train up your team to use in-game. That we could now share good, competitively trained teams for new players to use was massive in bringing down that barrier to entry. And with the exception of the sandstorm weather effect, the matches ran perfectly, even with giant Pokemon dropping slabs of rock on each other. It doesn't quite make sense that you're standing in front of your Pokemon while this happens, but whatever. Breeding and raising money, BP, and other essentials for competitive play was also easier thanks to the wild area and max raid dens. Plus, you could experience this with 3 of your friends. The community aspect of Pokemon we enjoyed as kids had new life breathed into it with max raid battles. The battle itself isn't anything special, but being able to hunt for shiny, high IV, and Gigantamax Pokemon with your buddies is definitely a huge step forward for the series. We can see the effects of this philosophy evolving even more with Dynamax Adventures and Scarlet and Violet's open world multiplayer mode. Other quality of life changes were added that made playing through the story more fun as well. There was a free move tutor and name raider at every Pokemon Center, so now you had more room to experiment. If you wanted to switch up your party, you could do so straight from your menu. You no longer needed to go to the PC. HMs were gone, and autosave was in. For the first time, a mainline Pokemon game finally had autosave. Kinda mind-blowing that this was never a thing for a series that is known for grinding. I remember playing through 3 gyms, only for my Game Boy to die before I could save. I lost everything that day. I've never been the same since. Thanks to autosave, grinding was practically erased from the game with the addition of the experience share that couldn't be turned off. As you can imagine, not everyone was happy about this. It didn't really bother me because I've never found the mainline games hard even without experience share. Besides, it's clear Sword and Shield were designed with it in mind, unlike some games. I would also argue that this gives you more incentive to try out different Pokemon throughout your playthrough and to complete the Pokedex. By the way, I've never actually completed the Pokedex. Today's video is sponsored by HelloFresh. HelloFresh delivers fresh, quality produce from the farm to your door in less than a week, allowing you to enjoy the delicious flavors of the season right from your home. I've actually been using HelloFresh personally for a few weeks now, and I've been very impressed. I've had a ton of delicious vegetarian meals, and I save a ton of time because most meals can be ready to eat in around 30 minutes. I also just personally hate going to the grocery store, so having everything I need to eat well delivered to me makes my life much easier. Foolproof, step-by-step recipes mean a joyful cooking experience and stress-free meals. Use my link or go to hellofresh.com and use code POGWOLFOctober65 for 65% off plus free shipping on your first box. Once you click, my description will live update to count up the purchases. Thanks again to HelloFresh for the sponsor. Before we move on to the negatives, I just want to add that Sword and Shield's music is some of the best in the series to date. The Gym Leader theme? Marnie's battle theme? Eternatus' third theme? I mean, come on. You could play this at a rave and the crowd would go nuts. Postwick, Route 1, Hop's battle theme. I mean, it's banger after banger. I just feel like barely anyone talks about Sword and Shield's music that much, and it should be appreciated more. Now on to the negatives. I know the wild area is a great direction for the series and blah 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 blah, but why does it have to be so plain? Like half of it is just straight up grassland. Yeah, there's some scenery, and it opens up once you get floaties on your bike, but there's not much to dig into. Why do we suddenly black out every time they start digging? Game Freak really couldn't animate someone digging?
Finally awake.
Yeah, the wild area might be a cool feature, but unless you're hunting for something specific, its novelty wears off pretty quickly. especially when you use it online. Instead of having a set number of players pop into your game to play along with you, the developers opted for a strange NPC/MMO style online mode that pops in a bajillion people onto your screen that you can't even tell are real or not. When you try communicating with them, you just get a generic phrase and a gift, and the game lags like crazy. Riding through a dust storm with your internet on feels like your Switch is about to explode. Don't even get me started on the Ycom. Does this thing even work? Why am I not seeing raid requests? Why are half of them locked behind a password? What kills me about the Ycom is that back in Generation 6, Pokemon made the perfect system for all of this, the PSS. It was so well made, I thought it would be around forever. I mean, they couldn't really improve on it. And then came the Festival Plaza. At the time, I was devastated. They made something so much worse. And now, I miss the Festival Plaza dearly. That's how bad Ycom is. Anyway, back to the story. If you've seen enough of my videos, then you know that I couldn't really care less about the story in Pokemon games. Did Sword and Shield do anything to change that? No. If anything, it made me hate the stories even more. I am so tired of the same formula being reused in every mainline game. Meet the professor, get a starter, battle 8 gyms as you get interrupted by your rival, and boring villains. Catch the legendary, beat the game. No matter how many of the specifics changed, these are the core elements of every mainline Pokemon game, and Sword and Shield is no different. Like the games before it, your journey is a linear path with endless bodies of text. At least there were less cutscenes than Ultra Sun and Moon. A video game made for the Nintendo Switch by the highest selling franchise of all time still doesn't have voice acting. I'm willing to excuse Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl for not having it, because that might just be off-putting, but not even Legends Arceus has it. I understand that these games are enjoyed by countless other countries who speak different languages, but so many other games find a way to make it work. If the Pokemon Company is so dead set on not hiring voice actors for every language,
well, there are other ways around that.
The Sims speak Simlish. Animal Crossing's villagers speak gibberish. Have the people in Pokemon exclusively speak Japanese for all I care. Just do something to fill this dead air. As I mentioned, the route design in Sword and Shield is fairly linear. Every so often it can branch off into a secret area, but this is nothing compared to previous games. It seems like the designers put all their effort into the wild area instead. This wouldn't be so bad if the cities had more going on in them. This is where it's obvious the developers cut corners. Valenlia is maybe the most beautiful town in the entire series, and there's literally nothing to do there besides walk up some stairs, talk to a few people, and then fight the gym. At least the forest you had to walk through to get there was a nice little maze, but the reward you get for making your way through was not worth it. Spikemuth is just embarrassing. These games already have a reputation for being hallway simulators. Now we have a city that is a literal hallway. This town's saving grace is the thematic weight it has on the lore. Spikemuth is run down, doesn't have the ability to use Dynamax, and contains the first Dark-type gym in the series. The citizens are seen as outcasts who shut their gate off to the rest of the region. Unfortunately, there's just no escaping how boring the design is. What sucks even more is that these towns could have been the best in the series had they just gotten more work put into them. This is the last negative I have for the base game, the battle animations. Now, I understand that animating every single Pokemon using every single move in their moveset could be a headache. I understand Game Freak is on a clock here. It might not be feasible at this point, but I mean, come on, at least look at the animations. Sometimes the default animations look so goofy, I can't help but cringe. This is less a criticism of the developers and more so the conditions they're forced to work under. Pokemon games are timed to release alongside the anime, toys, and a card game. If the games get postponed, the rest of their products would be too. Let these games get as much time as they need to be the best they can be, and the other products will reap the same rewards. Also, to be fair, there are some really great animations in the game. Like, look at No Retreat. I just wish there were less of a discrepancy between the best and worst animations. Hey, it's me, Wolf. Hey, you should subscribe to the channel. Come on, it's cool to do it. Come on, you want to do it, right? Come on. Back to the video. I don't think I've mentioned it, but I actually don't think these games are bad. If they were bad, me and millions of other fans wouldn't have kept playing all these years. Part of the reason we've stuck around is because Game Freak has continued to support them. Most people usually beat the story and then move on to the next thing. Game Freak sought out to stop this by taking a page out of the live service style game and keeping Sword and Shield alive through various in-game events. Prior entries had themed competitions in VGC to keep us hooked, but the only events for the base games were always distributions. You know the ones where you'd awkwardly bring your Nintendo DS to a GameStop and hope nobody from school saw you. I'm glad those are gone. With Max Raids, catching these distribution Pokemon was an in-game challenge rather than the in-person challenge of going outside. The Who's That Pokemon gimmick from the anime made its way into the game to show you what would be in the den you were entering. Once or twice a month, Game Freak would program in rare Pokemon or Pokemon with higher odds of being a shiny. Really, these were just distribution events, but now you had to fight them and you could do it with your friends. No more hiding in the corner trying to connect your DS to GameStop's crappy Wi-Fi before someone from school walked in. I really appreciate that Game Freak continued to give us themed competitions as well. My favorite was a tournament that required every team to have a Magikarp, which you can watch me compete in here. This was nearly 3 years after the game came out. We got competitions for Galar Pokemon, Baby Pokemon, Scary Pokemon. There was even one that only allowed Pokemon that knew Metronome, which I also made a video on. If you thought competitive Pokemon relied too much on luck before this, wait till you try this format. For those who wanted to compete in in-person tournaments but could not attend, there were online international challenges and Players' Cups instead. The first international challenge even awarded CP to use toward the World Championships. All the international challenges would award BP, in-game clothing, or shiny legendaries, and anyone who played at least 3 matches would receive them. Because the competitive circuit was cancelled, the Pokemon Company created the Players' Cup, online tournaments that you actually had to qualify for. These were fantastic because we got to see so many new faces and playstyles. Making it to nationals or worlds requires a lot of time, money, and travel. So to have what essentially is an online version of that was amazing to see. Accessibility creates more opportunity and growth, so everyone wins in the long run. Not to mention, whoever won received a travel award for the next international competition they wanted to attend. I'm proud to have been the winner of the second Players' Cup, and I hope to see them return for Scarlet and Violet. If you just wanted to play on the ladder, there were enough shakeups to the metagame to keep you interested in that as well. That is, until they showed up. Typically, each series in VGC would add or ban certain Pokemon. Series 6 spanned the top 10 most used Pokemon from Series 5. Series 12 allowed the use of 2 restricted Pokemon on each team. One of the most popular series in competitive Pokemon was one that didn't allow Dynamax at all. Even though I love Dynamax, I'll admit it was refreshing to play some old-fashioned Pokemon with no gimmicks involved. Players seem to agree, because this series saw a spike in active users, and the game had been out for 2 years at this point. You guys really hate Dynamax. It's okay, Colossal. I still love you. At this point, the Pokemon Company was faced with a crucial decision. Do we release a third version, possibly losing money and the player base that we've cultivated? Do we remake Generation 4 and hope players shift over to that? No. Let's do the more sensible, modern video game trope. Downloadable content. Sword and Shield's first DLC was the Isle of Armor, an island off the coast of Galar that is home to the Master Dojo and 107 Pokemon from previous generations. 383 left to go. The whole island is completely open world and has so much to explore. I know this because the DLC forces it down your throat in lieu of a proper story. When you arrive at the Master Dojo, you're given 3 trials in order to receive Kubfu, the pre-evolution of Urshifu, mascot legendary for the Isle of Armor. The trials are as follows. Defeat 3 Slowpoke in the Soothing Wetlands, find 3 clusters of max mushrooms in Warm-Up Tunnel, and then battle your new rival, which you've already done a handful of times. Once you receive Kubfu, you'll have to raise its friendship by taking it to 4 different locations around the island and viewing the scenery? After this, Kubfu will be ready to evolve, but you'll have to decide between its 2 forms. Urshifu Rapid Strike, a fighting and water type, or Urshifu Single Strike, a fighting and dark type. You won't be able to obtain its other form unless you trade for it, so you really had to do your research if you were going to use it competitively. I really like both Urshifu forms, and even used one of them to win the Players' Cup too. It's clear that it was designed specifically for competitive play due to its ability Unseen Fist, which allows it to hit through Protect. Its signature Gigantamax move also hits through Max Guard, which wasn't penetrable before this. This portion of the Isle of Armor story is playable after you've visited the wild area on mainland Galar, but you'd have to become the champion and beat the post-game before you could unlock its final act. Guess what? It's just another fetch quest. At least you get a genuinely tough battle against the dojo master out of it. You're probably thinking I hated the Isle of Armor, but there was actually quite a bit to like about it as well. This DLC was great in that it was a huge step forward towards breaking down the barrier of entry for competitive Pokemon. Max Soup allowed players to give any Pokemon its Gigantamax form, provided it had one. Feathers were floating around the Honeycomb Sea, so you could boost your EVs easier. The Move Tutor introduced dozens of new moves that changed the metagame forever, and the vending machine gave us vitamins at a discounted rate, assuming you had enough watts to even install it in the first place. But the best addition of all was Lady Clear, who would reset your Pokemon's EVs for only 10 Armorite ore, one of the many currencies in Sword and Shield. Clearing your EVs is great for Pokemon that need to be adjusted for new metas. You could also use it if you messed up during training. Better yet, you could also use it on your story team. Finally, you can battle competitively with all those Pokemon you bonded with during your playthrough. Have a Pokemon from your childhood you want to play with again? Trade it up to Sword and Shield, reset its EVs, and raise it from the ground up. It's genius if you ask me. Someone please rescue this lady though. She's been stranded on this tiny piece of land for like years. The second DLC, the Crown Tundra, was definitely a step up, but it suffered from very high highs and super low lows. It also introduced 123 more Pokemon from prior generations. Almost got there. Sorry guys. The highest of the highs was the map. It was everything the wild area and the Isle of Armor should have been, taking the open world approach and blending it with that classic Pokemon route design. You can actually get lost in caves again. All the scenery felt lived in and unique, and the landmarks actually had something to do with the story. Remember the Watchtower ruins from the wild area? It's totally pointless. The Crown Tundra's locations were all important and memorable. Dynatree Hill features a giant berry tree surrounded by the legendary Galarian birds. Approaching it will activate a cutscene where the birds disperse. Each one becomes a chase to catch up to and battle. This, my friends, is what a roaming legendary should be. No more walking back and forth in tall grass with a max repel until it pops up. That's annoying. We are not playing on a Game Boy anymore, folks. The temples sprinkled throughout the tundra house Regice, Regirock, Registeel, and your choice of Regieleki or Regidrago. Picking one, of course, makes the other unobtainable unless traded for. Pick Regieleki. If you have all of them in your party, you can visit an inactive raid den just south of Snowslide Slope, and you'll find Regigigas, who has a 100% catch rate. Maybe he's just tired, I don't know. Up on the slippery slope, you'll find a cave where you can participate in Dynamax adventures. Here, you'll join a group of 3 players, rent a Pokemon, and make your way through a cave, defeating Dynamax Pokemon along the way. Each player chooses to catch these Pokemon and trade it for their rental. Whether you trade it or not, it will be made available again after your adventure. Make it to the end before fainting 4 times, and you'll have a chance of catching a random Dynamax legendary Pokemon. Lose to it, and you'll have to start over. When you choose to go in next time, you'll have the option to chase the legendary you lost to, or fight a random one. All you have to do is defeat it and you get a 100% chance of catching it, but you can only catch it once. Going back into the cave without selecting a specific legendary, there's always a chance that you'll run into one you've already caught. You can also use Dynamax Adventures to shiny hunt with increased odds, or to farm Dynite Ore, yet another currency added in Sword and Shield. Give 200 Dynite Ore to the backpacker beside the cave, and you'll get the Ability Patch. This patch will change a Pokemon's ability to their hidden ability, which are typically extremely hard to get. With Lady Clear and the Ability Patch, any Pokemon you've ever used can now be made competitive ready. This is a huge win for those who couldn't get into VGC because they had no connection to the Pokemon they would be battling with. Dynamax Adventures was max raid hunting with your friends in its ultimate form. Don't have anyone to play with? Then you'll be placed in a group with random strangers or NPCs. Many content creators hosted Dynamax Adventure Nights so fans could play with them or within their communities. Unfortunately, there's no way to communicate unless you're on stream or in a Discord, so you're kind of just hoping for the best here. The NPCs feel like they're a little smarter than the ones you get in max raid dens, but there's still no replacement for real people. In some cases at least. Every now and then, you'll be matched with a group that votes to take on a water type when you all have fire types, and you need an electric type to beat the legendary. It's kind of a nightmare. What else was a nightmare? These gosh darn footprints. Who on earth thought it would be fun to follow a set of footprints, press A on each one of them, hear the same sound effect, and close out of a pop-up 50 times. I literally had to mute my TV playing this portion of the game. After finding 50 of them, you'll unlock 3 of the Swords of Justice. Placing them in your party and setting up a tent on an island and Balamir Lake will unlock Keldeo. Was it worth it? I would argue absolutely not. The lowest of the low is the story though. This one's even worse than the Isle of Armor. Just block after block of text. I'm not even sure voice acting would have saved this one. What is that? Calyrex is the Crown Tundra's legendary mascot, and it sure is something. Midway through the story, you'll have to decide between Calyrex's 2 legendary steeds, Glastrier and Spectrier. At the end, you'll catch Calyrex Ice Rider or Shadow Rider depending on which horse you picked. They're both powerful on their own, but merge them together and you have one of the strongest Pokemon ever made. Before we move on to our next section, let's address the elephant in the room. The last piece of DLC, Zarude, Gen 8's one and only mythical, which everybody completely forgot about until its release a year later, and then immediately forgot about again. I have nothing against Zarude's design, but its stats and ability weren't anything special. It's also strange that we only got 1 mythical this generation, as opposed to the 3 or 4 we used to get. Is it because they wanted it to coincide with the movie that got delayed, or did they come to their senses and realize nobody really likes the idea of mythical Pokemon? Who's to say? Not much happened in 2021. Sales had died down, new games were announced, the pandemic was still in full force, so any hope of live events coming back was thrown out the window. Those who were still playing Sword and Shield were mostly popping in and out during max raid events or new series in VGC, like the No Dynamax one I mentioned earlier. We all saw Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl as the light at the end of the tunnel, but I think you know how those turned out. The third and final year for Sword and Shield started off with a bang, that being another Pokemon game came out to pull us away from it. Pokemon Legends Arceus released in late January and blew our collective minds. But again, no ladder. There wasn't even online battling. That didn't stop it from being one of my favorite Pokemon games though. You can see where I ranked it among the other mainline games here. 3 years in, 2 other games released, and Game Freak was still supporting Sword and Shield. It's honestly mind-blowing that they kept it up for this long. Sword and Shield aren't live service games like Unite or Go. They're just your average mainline entry, but they were the second highest grossing game in the franchise. Of course you're going to support them, and they hadn't even had a world championship yet. But with COVID restrictions easing up around the world, this would finally be the year. In August, London, inspired by the town of Wyndon in Sword and Shield, hosted the 2022 World Championships. This would be the first time in 3 years that we'd be competing in a live tournament. So everyone was going to be a bit rusty. I decided to train the hardest I ever have, building multiple teams, practicing against friends, studying the meta, analyzing my opponents. I got eliminated day 1. It's okay though, I had fun and it was really good to be back. What's the point of playing if you're not going to have fun and enjoy the time that you're there? I got a sweet vacation out of it too, so I'm not complaining. What was waiting for me once I got back home? Series 13 of competitive Pokemon. This is the first time in history that competitive Pokemon would allow the use of mythical Pokemon. This unprecedented decision has always been out of the question because mythicals were only distributed for short periods of time and usually in person. Some of them hadn't been distributed in years and people had no way to obtain them unless by trade. But who's going to trade their mythicals? Adding just 1 mythical to the pool could completely change the meta, but adding as many as you want? It was pure chaos. Game Freak really wanted to end Sword and Shield's record-shattering run on a high note, or maybe they just wanted to have some fun because there weren't any tournaments with this mythical rule set. I really appreciate them keeping the game alive all these years. What was looking to be the death of the franchise somehow made it out as one of the most beloved, highest selling, and the longest supported games in Pokemon history. I hope I can say the same about Scarlet and Violet. By the way, I want to say thanks to everyone who supported me and sent such kind messages while I was at Worlds. It means a lot, and I hope I can repay you with quality content on this channel. My YouTube journey really kicked off with Sword and Shield, so it's bittersweet saying goodbye to them after all this time. But I look forward to continuing that journey through Gen 9 and beyond. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the Paldea region.